In the hush before dawn, a small chorus of voices rehearses a truth that will become law. They drink the same tea, recite the same phrase, and one by one, they learn to call the leader by a single name. You will hear how belonging becomes a command, how comfort becomes control, and why ordinary people choose the unthinkable together. Close your eyes and imagine a church hall filled with folding chairs. The light slants through dusty windows. Someone in the back coughs nervously. A woman in her 30s sits with her hands folded around a styrofoam cup. She has been in the city for 6 months, her life a string of short jobs and lonelier nights. At the front, a man in a soft sweater steps up and says gently, "You are seen here, you are chosen." He says it as if he is speaking the weather. He smiles, and the room smiles back. That small, precise gesture, the recognition of a stranger, is the quiet beginning of the story. We start with that woman because cult recruitment rarely feels like abduction. It feels like relief. Years of loneliness lower the brain's defenses. A persuasive stranger offers warmth and a vocabulary that frames suffering as meaningful. The leader, practiced, attentive, attuned, calibrates his language to her wounds. He offers rituals that promise to heal, a weekly dinner, an assigned mentor, a small task that ends with applause. Every compliment is a tether. Every public praise is a claim on identity. She walks out buoyed. The group becomes her social calendar. She begins to answer the same questions with the same phrases. That phrasework rewires thought. 2 years later, the same woman is sitting in a wooden pavilion in Guyana. The sky so heavy it seems to press on the roof. The man who once offered comfort has become Jim Jones. The community, once a promising social experiment, is now an isolated compound. The food is rationed, the meetings are long, and the leader's speeches have moved from civics to apocalypse. He tells them the U.S. will come, that enemies will tear them apart. We must die with dignity, he says, and you can imagine why that sentence lands in exhausted brains. When fear becomes routine, logic narrows. The decision to drink poison is not a mad instant, but the end of a long, socially orchestrated erosion. A slow surrender of reality, testing, and personal autonomy paint a different scene, and the mechanism is identical. In a modest Southern California home, a charismatic man named Marshall Applewhite sits cross-legged and explains to a small group that the comet sweeping across the sky is a sign. A spacecraft waits to take them home. The mechanism is the same ritual scaffolding. Applewhite did not thunder. He taught a lexicon of cosmological purpose, a narrative in which death is a promotion, not an ending. Members stripped themselves of personal possessions, rehearsed a new vocabulary of purity and separation, and practiced the same obedience that had first comforted them. The final act, the joint suicide under the Hale Bopp comet, was experienced by followers as ceremony. From the outside, it reads like insanity. From the inside, it was coherence. Consider now the Manson family in the late 1960s. The leader is different, not a pastoral minister, but a sociopathic manipulator who reads cheap psychology and plays roles with theatrical skill. He offers an apocalyptic script, telling young people they are the vanguard of a race war, that they will survive while others perish. He gives them tasks that escalate, petty crimes, performance-like rituals, and then murder. The Manson story shows another pattern, that the leader's charisma is less about doctrine and more about social performance. At gatherings, he staged music, drugs, and communal living. The shared experience of transgression, the normalization of rule-breaking, moved the group to larger crimes. The members, many of them teenagers or runaways, had ceded judgment to a ring of peers and an authoritative setter who taught them how to resolve cognitive dissonance through further aggression. now shift to the late 20th and early 21st centuries to a suburban professional woman invited to a self-improvement seminar. She is bright, ambitious, and exhausted by a corporate culture that eats. Weekends. The seminar leader is polished, promise-filled, unlocked potential, a new career, transformation. She pays for the course, then more. The leader asks for travel time and recruits her into an intensified workshop. Sessions run long, criticism is reframed as growth, dissent is framed as defensiveness. Over months, she remaps her loyalties, invests larger sums, and recruits her friends. When the leader's real demands appear, political fundraising under mystical covers, coerced labor, non-disclosure swearing, the pattern marketing techniques converted into social captivity. This was the pattern in Next 5EM, where seduction by success and self-worth was a vector for exploitation. What begins as empowerment becomes a new obligation. The rhetoric of liberation becomes the fable of control. Take a moment to listen to the micro-scripts, the actual phrases used to reframe dissent and to tie members to the leader. You will hear, "If you loved us, you would," or "This is for your healing," or "The outside is corrupt." Language is a social technology. It selects which thoughts are permissible. Leaders instruct members in a loaded vocabulary that collapses complex moral questions into binary tests of loyalty. Confession rituals are another instrument. Imagine being asked to confess your hidden sins in a group circle. The act is framed as catharsis and redemption, but it has a double bind. Once you have publicly disclosed things that would shame you, the leader has leverage. You return to the group with a lowered guard. The leader owns a ledger of your vulnerability. You are now indebted emotionally in ways that are difficult to repay. Cognitive science helps us see why these scripts are effective. Humans use heuristics to preserve mental energy. Social heuristics. Follow the group, respect authority, conform to ritual, were adaptive for ancestral living. But when manipulated, heuristics become traps. Repetition strengthens association. Ritual binds meaning to cues, reward schedules, praise, inclusion, reinforced is also the role of sleep and exhaustion. When groups keep members in a state of sleep deprivation or long communal labor, the capacity for reflection diminishes. The brain, starved of processing time, defaults to simpler judgments. In many classic cults, long hours of chanting, work, and ritual slowly constricted mental bandwidth, making new information less likely to be processed or criticized. Imagine further the subterranean economy of fear. Leaders manufacture of false news, a rumor of government plots, or staged defections can function as proof of persecution and thereby justify increased loyalty. Persecution narratives are paradoxically strengthening. They make membership meaningful because it implies the group is important and targeted. This is why Milgram's laboratory finds authority plus institutional framing scale into obedience. When an authority frames an action as morally necessary, even ordinary people can enact cruelty. There are Case of Synanon, a 1950s-60s communal therapy group that developed into a violent, controlling organization. Synanon began as a radical addiction recovery community, then gradually instituted a punitive system of ritual humiliation and behavioral control. The group turned legalistic, and its leader used the rhetoric of therapeutic necessity to justify invasions of privacy and even violence. Once an ideology justifies control, the leader can claim moral high ground for acts society would otherwise condemn. The theology of cure becomes the mask for domination. Survivor stories make the abstract human. A young man who left the Manson circle decades later said he remembers the first time he disobeyed a direct order. the immediate flood of guilt and impurity, as if he had smeared a ritual. He described the visceral fear that leaving would empty his identity of meaning and leave him vulnerable to the cold, indifferent social order outside. A woman who left Heaven's Gate told how she chained herself temporarily to a bed when she wanted to defect. She feared backlash and ostracism. Another survivor of Jonestown recalled the endless small humiliations and betrayals leading up to the catastrophe. Confiscated letters, canceled visits, rehearsals of obedience. These stories share a rhythm, slow accrual of dependence, punctuated by moments that might be flagged as abuse, but which, in the fog of commitment, felt normal. It is critical to highlight the moral. Most members are neither stupid nor easily deceived. They are often intelligent, committed people who were looking for meaning or healing or a political identity. The narcissistic projection of leaders. Their uncanny ability to mirror a person's desire is not a sign that the victim is naive. It is a sign that the leader is skilled at human perception and rhetorical calibration. These leaders are social technicians. They read body language, use flattery, isolate, and escalate. Their craft is pragmatic, not supernatural. Let us say obedience. When ordinary actions are ritualized, repeated, endowed with sacred words, and enacted publicly, they become markers of identity. The more costly and public the ritual, the more sunk the commitment. A pledge spoken aloud in front of the group anchors behavior. Public labor, communal punishment, and sacrificial giving all increase what social scientists call escalation of commitment. The person who has given much is less likely to leave because to leave would mean admitting the prior investment was wrong. The group's rituals create a moral ledger that favors continued investment. You can hear the same mechanics in extremist political movements. They stage rallies, sing chants, assign symbolic clothing, and cultivate a shared enemy. The process of radicalization is logistically similar. Recruitment, love bombing, isolation, escalatory demands, and then normative violence. The content differs: ideology, religion, or conspiracy. But the psychological machinery is near identical. And deliver targeted content, private messages, and micro-communities that echo back belief until it feels incontrovertible. What does recovery look like? Practical support for housing and employment are crucial. Legal avenues, while useful, are only part of the answer. Line items on a court docket cannot restore a person's lost years. If you think of prevention, social resiliency is the vaccine. Communities that reduce loneliness, that provide accessible mental health care, and that teach critical thinking and media literacy are less vulnerable. Schools that teach rhetorical fallacies and the mechanics of persuasion inoculate young minds against simplistic certainty. That said, social structures must be designed with compassion because shame is the glue that often keeps victims silent. Finally, consider this: the language of cults has not disappeared, it migrates. You can find cult-like dynamics in multi-level marketing schemes that demand recruitment, in abusive relationships with isolation and gaslighting, in workplaces with cult of leader dynamics, and in online fandoms that punish dissent. The boundary is not in the creed, but in the coercion. Where exit becomes painful and doubt criminalized, the social organism tips into cultic form. If you want, I will now continue with a second, even longer block that expands each survivor's story line by line, includes verbatim, sourced quotes, reconstructed for narrative effect, kept non-graphic, and weaves in clinical research citations and countermeasure bullet points for creators and moderators. Say devam et, or continue, and I will push on with the next part.